Recently, the US and Europe significantly increased their military aid to Ukraine, notably with the delivery of the first batch of F-16 fighter jets, putting considerable pressure on Russia. Analysts suggest that Russia's frequent signals for peace talks may stem from anticipation of a full-scale counteroffensive by Ukrainian forces, fearing their own inability to defend, thus adopting a conciliatory stance. According to reports, the first batch of F-16 fighter jets delivered by Ukraine by Norway successfully took off on May 4th and is expected to arrive in Ukraine in the coming days. Ukrainian officials have confirmed this news and predict that the first F-16s will arrive after May 5th. This delivery, a decision by the White House, will significantly enhance the Ukrainian Air Force's capabilities to counter Russian aggression. This indicates that the US believes it is time to counterattack or that the situation necessitates a faster pace of counterattack, undoubtedly sounding an alarm for Putin's regime. Multiple sources indicate that Ukraine might launch a large-scale counteroffensive against Russia ahead of schedule. Signs include, first, Ukraine significantly increased its drone purchases, totaling 1.5 billion, up to 300,000 units, which, with Western aid, have surpassed Russian capabilities and becoming a crucial offensive tool. Second, Ukraine formed a unit equipped with 1,000 tactical missiles with a range of 300 kilometers. Thirdly, Russian Su-35 and Su-30 fighter jets were withdrawn from the front line and Crimea to deeper territories within Russia. This move is likely in order to avoid strikes from Ukrainian drones and the impending F-16s. And fourth, French President Macron reiterated that if Russia makes significant advances in Ukraine and the latter requests help, France does not rule out sending troops. As part of the US global strategy, if Ukraine fails, US forces stationed in Europe and the UE member states' armies might intervene in the battlefield. Previously, France stated it could send 20,000 troops to Ukraine within a month and command up to 60,000 NATO forces in combat. As part of the US global strategy, US forces in Europe and UE member states' armies would intervene in Ukraine if it were defeated, with the US military's main focus still in the Indo-Pacific. After Brexit, the US hopes for France to lead the EU's military actions. This is considering France holds a strategic position in nuclear warfare, with its advanced naval and aerial nuclear forces and strong interception systems. The early arrival of F-16s on the Ukrainian battlefield suggests that the new Patriot missile defense system provided by NATO have arrived or are about to arrive. Surprisingly, Ukraine was provided with about 5 such systems. Germany, Greece, Spain, and the Netherlands will also supply more intercept missiles. By the end of this year, Ukraine is expected to have at least 10 Patriot systems, with 5 provided by the US and 6 to 7 by European countries. Additionally, the deployment of the US National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems (NASAMS) and Germany's IRST systems is increasing. With the arrival of the F-16s, Ukraine's newly established air defense network will accelerate formation, adequately protecting the F-16s from Russian hypersonic missile strikes. By the end of this year, Ukraine is expected to have at least 10 Patriot systems, with the US providing at least 5 this year and European countries potentially contributing 6 to 7. The early deployment of F-16 fighter jets in Ukraine suggests that the US wants the Ukrainian forces to integrate ground attacks, air attacks, and ground defenses. At the same time, it is to conduct coordinated air, ground, and defense operations to gain practical experience. As more fighter jets, tactical missiles, artillery, tanks, armored vehicles, and air defense systems arrive, Ukraine will gradually establish a robust joint combat force. Compared to the conventional strategy of focusing on ground combat first, then building air defenses, and finally deploying fighter jets, this approach allows for a gradual integration of combat elements, forming a more solid system. Russian forces will face the enormous pressure of rapid enhancements. If Ukrainian forces can dominate Russia in combined offensive and defensive operations, Putin's countermeasures will be forced to advance, whether through proactive withdrawal, forced retreat, or the use of nuclear weapons. If Putin is forced to withdraw, Ukrainian forces may pursue a victorious advance, posing a risk of collapse for Putin's regime. If a proactive retreat occurs, it would certainly be after negotiations with the US. Thus, the more likely scenario is that while Putin threatens to destroy facilities like the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, he would retreat from Ukraine territory while negotiating with the US in the background. When Putin initiated the war, he aimed to leverage Europe's dependency on Russian energy. Internal divisions with the US and Europe, and the US military's pivot to the Indo-Pacific. He also hoped that the situation would turn around with China's support. However, the US has used the Ukrainian battlefield to drain Russia and China. The timing and intensity of aid from the US, Japan, Europe, and Australia reflect the White House's control over the escalation of the war. The US strategic intention is to support Ukraine's counteroffensive, defeat Russia, and then focus on containing China in the Indo-Pacific. For this, the US is even prepared to engage in simultaneous combat in Ukraine, the Middle East, and the Western Pacific. Thus, understanding the situation in Ukraine requires considering this broader context. With the arrival of the F-16 fighter jets and the new round of military aid from the West, Ukraine's counteroffensive has officially begun. The primary task is to use F-16s to attempt to shoot down Russian bombers and fighter jets, then continuously use drones to strike Russian energy and military targets while coordinating Army tactical missiles and fighter jets carrying Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles to maximally advance attacks on Russian airports and logistics. On the battlefield, various military branches coordinate closely under the guidance of drones, with medium and long-range artillery, infantry fighter vehicles, and tanks working together. Ukraine will also increase the deployment of Patriot missiles and enhance their coordination with air defense systems. As Ukraine's ground offensive matures, its air defense interception capabilities will also improve. Reports indicate that Ukrainian forces have begun testing Army tactical missiles attacks on the Crimea Bridge. Russia has tried to intercept this with limited success. This phase may last 1 to 2 months, concluding by June at the latest. Starting in July, as Ukraine deploys mobile tactical missiles, airstrike missiles, and air defense suppression, Russian forces' disadvantages in ground troops and air defense interception will increasingly become apparent. Ukrainian forces are expected to launch attacks in Donbass and on the left bank of the Dnipro River, mainly composed of Russian forces, and continue advancing into Russian territory. Russian forces may face a complete collapse and full withdrawal from Ukrainian territory, but even so, this does not necessarily mean Russia has been defeated. Faced with a progressively losing battle, Russia may deploy a large number of fighter jets for an offensive. At that time, both sides will re-engage in large-scale aerial combat and air defense contests, posing a significant test for Ukrainian air defense interception and limited fighter jet capabilities. If Putin remains determined, Russian forces might have already retreated to eastern Donbass by that time. Although Ukrainian F-16 fighter jets are fewer in number compared to Russian forces, the cover of strong air defense systems will ensure their safety. This will enable them to rely on radar command systems, NATO intelligence support, and especially the superior AIM-120C medium-range air-to-air missiles and AIM-9 Sidewinder short-range air combat missiles to severely damage Russian aircraft. At this stage, if Russia does not deploy nuclear weapons, it is essentially set for defeat. At that time, the Black Sea Fleet might completely withdraw from Crimea and even the Black Sea. Possibly a small portion of vessels will be relocating to Georgian ports on the east coast of the Black Sea, but this is still within the attack range of Ukrainian fighter jets, and local civilians might also cause disruptions. Russian ground forces would suffer a total collapse. Despite the numerical superiority of Russian-made fighter jets, faced with Ukraine's tight air defense network and advanced air-to-air missiles, they would ultimately be shot down. The Russian military, once touted as the second most powerful on the surface of the earth, would thus end in defeat. US President Joe Biden is preparing for his re-election campaign and, at the same time, coordinating Ukraine's overall counteroffensive. The US election will conclude in early November, potentially coinciding with an end to the conflict in Ukraine. For Biden's team, defeating Putin is only the first step. Subsequently, they aim to fully contain the Chinese Communist Party. The US has even prepared for conflicts in Ukraine, Israel, and the Western Pacific. Thus, as Ukraine counterattacks, the possibility of escalating situations in the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific is also rising. The Kremlin has clearly recognized that Ukraine now possesses a considerable amount of advanced weaponry, including army tactical missiles, heavy artillery, medium artillery, tanks, infantry fighter vehicles, armored vehicles, and drones. With more Patriot systems being deployed and the introduction of F-16 fighter jets, the Ukrainian military will be able to conduct comprehensive land and air defenses, making it difficult for Russia to achieve its strategic goals through military means alone. In response, Putin's regime has begun to send multiple signals indicating a willingness for peace talks. Senior Russian officials have repeatedly expressed a desire to resolve the Ukrainian crisis through negotiations. On May 3rd, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova mentioned the necessity of peaceful resolution and negotiations twice. As early as March 26, Putin's spokesperson Peskov stated that Russia saw the need to discuss all issues with the US against the backdrop of current US-Russia relations and was willing to engage in dialogue. The implication is that the Kremlin is willing to negotiate with the West and discuss political solutions as long as the US can guarantee Putin's leadership position in Russia. Clearly, under immense domestic and international pressure, Putin's team is seeking a major strategic shift. Europe and the US, by draining Putin's regime through conventional warfare, are prepared for two scenarios: either to exploit Putin's domestic and international troubles to fully topple his regime and subsequently lead post-war reconstruction in Ukraine, shifting strategic focus to the Indo-Pacific, or, if Putin's regime is on the brink, to force a compromise that gives Putin a way out, aligning with the US strategy to contain China. Putin has always sought the best possible outcome, or at least to hold some Ukrainian territory to justify actions to his people, but now he must face reality. If the US can preserve Putin's regime, Russian forces might completely withdraw from Ukraine and assist the US in confronting China. The issue now is how the US will handle this situation. This requires analysis from both Democratic and Republican perspectives. There are clear differences between the Democratic and Republican parties on how to handle the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Democrats hope to continue providing military aid to Ukraine, exhausting the Kremlin and its Chinese backers, to more easily manage these adversaries in the Indo-Pacific. The Biden administration's idea is to either collapse the Kremlin and then address China in the Indo-Pacific, or weaken the Kremlin significantly so that Russian influence exits Europe, allowing Putin to help the US counter China, for the US and its allies to handle both China and Russia together. However, Republicans prefer not to see Russia completely withdraw from Ukraine. They would rather have Russia continue causing trouble in Europe, forcing European countries to significantly increase their military spending and buy more weapons from the US, creating business opportunities for American arms dealers. Republicans also hope to use the situation with Russia to force European concessions in economic and trade negotiations. Therefore, Republicans advocate for wealthy European countries to lead and fund aid to Ukraine rather than the US footing the bill. The Republican calculation is that as Europe's military capabilities generally increase, they can help the US counter China and maximize American interests in the Indo-Pacific. The Democratic and Republican parties in the US show clear differences and ongoing struggles over aid to Ukraine. While carefully weighing the balance of power between the two parties, the Biden administration also precisely controls the scale and pace of aid to Ukraine, thereby influencing the entire course of the war. If the $60 billion in aid funds were given to Ukraine ahead of schedule, or other assistance were fully provided according to democratic wishes, the course of the war might be different. However, this is not a scenario the Biden administration wants to see. They need to ensure Ukraine receives enough support without allowing the conflict to end too prematurely. The Biden team has proposed an aid plan that is difficult for Republicans to agree to and to concede to, effectively allowing the Republicans to delay, which in reality is what the Biden team desires. The goal is to force Putin to commit more in the process of dragging out, allowing Democrats and Biden to gain popularity and Republicans and Trump to lose points, while also forcing Putin to exert more effort and investment, akin to increasing stakes in a gamble. The Biden team has a comprehensive and detailed assessment of the battlefield situation, including Russian military power, logistics, national strength, decision-making processes, and Ukraine's offensive and defensive capabilities. The choice of types, quantities, and timing of aid is precise and cautious, aimed at maximizing the exhaustion of Russia's comprehensive national strength. This precise control capability must be backed by top-tier information gathering, precise analysis by supercomputers and AI algorithm models comparable to the most cutting-edge technology available today. Thus, the Biden administration is able to comprehensively direct and control the course of the battlefield, waiting for the right moment to launch a comprehensive Ukrainian counteroffensive, fundamentally altering the course of the war. This strategic game involves not only the domestic rivalry between the two American parties, but also concerns the US global strategic layout. For Putin and Xi Jinping, the real crisis may just be beginning.